And for more on the Australian reaction to these attacks, political reporter Cameron Redden joins me from Canberra. Cam, good afternoon to you. How has the Albanese government responded?
Yeah, with condemnation, Janie, mirroring much of the rhetoric that's been used by the rest of the world, talking about the right for Israel to defend itself, condemning the actions of Hamas, this group that has been recognised for about 18 months. Early 2022 was listed as a terrorist organisation by Australia in its entirety, although the political wing of Hamas and other parts of it have been recognised as a terror group way back into the early 2000s, albeit in its entirety since early 2022. The Prime Minister speaking for the first time about this morning, mirroring some of the language used by Joe Biden and others, again talking about the right of Israel to defend itself and certainly condemning the actions by Hamas over the past 24 hours.
People are worried about escalation, but Israel has a right to defend itself and it will be doing so. This is an attack on Israel by Hamas that has no precedent for what is occurring here.
So at this stage, there are no known Australian casualties in amongst the hundreds that have been killed in the violence over the past 24 hours or so. There are also no known hospitalisations or injuries at this stage. The authorities on the ground, as well as authorities here, are in constant communication in relation to that. What we do know, though, is that there was this stationing of 11 ADF personnel that were working alongside the United Nations forces over there that had been stationed in Israel as well as surrounding nations, including Lebanon and Egypt. All of those are safe and accounted for, as confirmed by the Defence Minister, Richard Marles, earlier today. One of those Australians who's living in Israel at the moment in a town called Yehud. It's about 45 minutes from Jerusalem. It's just not far away from the main airport in Israel near Tel Aviv. Her name is Emily. She spoke to Sky News earlier. She and her family have spent much of the day in a bunker in their house alongside her 3 children. This is some of her account of when the missiles started landing near her.
At first I thought it was like neighbours playing bass music or something, and then all of a sudden the sirens began and I realised this is something. I sort of grabbed all 3 of my kids out of bed and my husband, and we just ran down to the bomb shelter. What we're seeing is honestly the most horrific thing. I've been writing about Israel for my entire adult life, and this is the most horrific thing I've ever seen.
Cam, the opposition has condemned these attacks on Israel, but there is also criticism of the Prime Minister's response. What have they had to say?
Yeah, that's right, Janie. You can see the comments from Peter Dutton, the opposition leader, on your screen there, calling this attack a provocation of Israel, condemning that as well. We've also heard from the former Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, who was in power when Hamas was listed as a terrorist organisation in its entirety. He's described that organisation, Hamas, as an instrument of death and war. He says Israel has every right to defend itself from these violent attacks and should be given every support to achieve this. There has, though, been a political wedge levelled this morning by the opposition, and it has to do with the timeline of messages put out by figures in the government. The first to move was Penny Wong late last night, just before 8 p.m. Eastern time, putting out a tweet condemning the attacks around the same time, maybe even just before many of the other world leaders were too. Now, why the timeline here matters is that the Deputy Liberal leader, Susan Lee, has accused the Prime Minister today of essentially slacking off last night. The first we heard from the Prime Minister was 6 o'clock this morning, about 20 past 6, in the form of a Twitter message, a Twitter post on X, as it's now known, before going on national television after 9 o'clock. In terms of a timeline, we first heard from the Foreign Minister last night, just before 8 p.m, from the Opposition Leader at 10 o'clock, from others at various times throughout the night, and then the Prime Minister at 6 o'clock this morning. The opposition is arguing today that essentially the Prime Minister should have been heard from earlier. Susan Lee says that timeline's not good enough.
I see this as yet another failure of leadership by Anthony Albanese. It took him until 6 a.m. this morning to actually make a public statement about this. Now, you don't get nights off as world leader. Australians rightly deserve to know where the leader of their country stood in the hours after this attack. I'm quite frequently critical of Anthony Albanese, and I'm not going to take a backward step.
So the Deputy Liberal leader saying the Prime Minister should have put out a Twitter post perhaps or something prior to the one that he did at 6 o'clock this morning. Just within a few seconds of making that comment on Sky News, Janie, this was the response from one Cabinet Minister to Sky News. It was a 3-word message. What a disgrace. So a political furor kicking off already. What we do know, though, is that across the board in terms of the actual attacks on the ground by Hamas into Israel, wide condemnation across the political divide. Jane.
Yeah, it certainly sounds that way. Cameron Redden, appreciate the update. And if you have any friends or family who are Australian and are in need of consular assistance in Israel, they can call the 24-hour Consular Emergency Centre on the numbers there on your screen.